So good afternoon and welcome to the Home Equity Access Scheme webinar. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we are broadcasting today. For me, I'm broadcasting from the land of the Widjabul people of the Bundjalung Nation. We pay our respects to the elders of the land, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today's webinar or watching the recording. And yes, just to let you know that we do record our webinars, and after the webinar has finished, we do upload them onto Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel. Welcome to the Legal Aid webinar on the Home Equity Access Scheme. My name is Bridget Barker and I work in the Community Legal Aid Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. This is a 1-hour webinar and, as I said, includes time for questions and answers at the end. After the webinar, you will receive an evaluation survey and we appreciate your feedback. You'll also receive an email with any information or resources we talk about today in the webinar. The scheme that Peter is discussing today, the Home Equity Access Scheme, applies Australia-wide. I'll now hand over to your presenter, Peter Thompson from the Financial Rights Legal Centre. Welcome, Peter.
Look, thank you, Bridget, and hello to financial counsellors and solicitors here in New South Wales. We do work on phone lines. The National Debt Helpline is one of 2 centres.
Peter, sorry to interrupt, but your sound is coming in and out. I don't know if there's a problem with the connection. I can't hear you at the moment. Yeah, the audience is saying that they can't hear either. Best laid plans, everybody, because Peter and I have been sitting here in Zoom early.
What about that? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Just get the audience to confirm they can hear you. Yes, you're back. I'll leave you to it. Thanks, Peter.
I've just requested the control back from you. There we go. I'm still not sure how I can see control the slides, Bridget.
I'm happy to control them for you if you just let me know.
I'll give it to you back, and best laid plans, as you say. I'll go back. So just go back 1 slide if you could, please, Bridget, and I'll just give people an overview of what we'll cover here. And we'll talk about the Home Equity Access Scheme. This is a scheme that's been in place one way or other in Australia for about 40 years. It was originally introduced by the Hawke government in the mid-80s, and it's been modified back and forth since then. It's a scheme that's got bipartisan support. And there we go. And so what we'll talk about is why it's really important that those of you who work with clients who are part of that eligible demographic, and we're mainly talking here age pensioners, but it might also be people on the carers pension or the disability support pension. Those are the ones who's eligible, and this can be often a useful scheme for them to know about if they need funds. We'll talk about the eligibility criteria, and then I've got a couple of busy slides in there, and we'll talk about concrete numbers about how this scheme might be tapped into by clients for various different purposes. You can think of the home equity access scheme, I'll just call it the HEAS. You can think of it like it's a reverse mortgage, but it's a little bit different. And a reverse mortgage, I realise, has a lot of negative connotations for some people, and we'll discuss the differences between the HEAS and reverse mortgage. And then finally, I'll give you some scenarios when talking about the HEAS with your clients might be an option to solve a particular problem that they might have. Next slide, please, Bridget. So in a nutshell, it is, if you like, it's a loan from the government which is secured on residential property. There's no repayments required on that loan. So in that sense, it's like a reverse mortgage, but there's a guaranteed right of possession for life. There's a guaranteed no negative equity. So the most you'll ever have to repay are the sale proceeds of the property. And as I say, although there's no obligation to make repayments during the life of the loan, of course, it can be repaid at any time along the way as well. You apply for the HEAS via Centrelink or via the MyGov channel, and I'll cover all of that later on. But Centrelink are desperate to let more and more people know about this scheme. And as I say, if you don't know too much, you're not alone. But I think by the end of today's talk, hopefully you will be really in the top 5% of knowledge for what people know about the home equity access scheme. How does it work? Well, essentially, when you apply for the home equity access scheme, you'll be given a what's so-called maximum loan amount, and you can draw down with payments being made from the government until that cumulative debt reaches the maximum loan amount. Before the 1st of July last year, this was really purely like a drip feed loan. No lump sum payments were available, and the way most people accessed it, and in fact the way most people still access it, is as a fortnightly supplement to their pension. And the maths is that the combination of your Centrelink payment and your HEAS payment could be no more than 150% of the full age pension. So if an age pensioner was in fact receiving the full age pension, then they could get another 50% more drawn down via the HEAS. If for whatever reason, income or assets assessment, they were drawing 80% of the age pension via Centrelink, then they could have 70% coming through extra via the HEAS. So that's the general formula there, 150%. And for most people that you deal with, who most of the ones I've dealt with so far are full age pensioners, meaning they can get a 50% top up to their pension. So as of today, a single age pensioner will receive $1,064.50 a fortnight, and they can get up to another 50% again, or $532 a fortnight via the HEAS. From July 2022, the rules changed again, and as well as being basically a drip feed loan, people can now get out a lump sum as well, subject to an annual cap. And roughly speaking, that annual cap works out to be about $13,000 for a single, or about $20,000 for a couple, but I'll cover all these numbers in more detail later on. So as of today, people can sort of mix and match. They can get a lump sum, or they can drip feed and get fortnightly supplements up to the annual limits. Thanks, Bridget. Now, who's eligible for the HEAS? It is, put simply, it's available to anyone who qualifies for any of those three pensions: the age pension, disability support, or the carer's payment. You've obviously got to be an Australian citizen and resident in Australia, I should point out. That's obviously an eligibility criteria for any of those pensions. Must have equity in a residential property of some sort. It doesn't have to be the roof over your head, although it usually is, or most people could be an investment property. As I say, and you don't have to have outright ownership of that property. You've just got to have some equity, so there can still be an encumbrance on the property, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And finally, you can't be a bankrupt or subject to an insolvency agreement. Now, in plain language, this is a scheme which is open to any resident Australians who are older than age 67, because they are all, in Centrelink's language, are eligible for the age pension. their entitlement might be zero because of income or asset tests, but they're all eligible. So essentially for any Australian age 67 or older who has some equity in a property, they're eligible for this home equity access scheme. Thanks, Bridget. In a nutshell, why do you need to know about this? Put simply, for clients who are eligible, if they're in a pinch and they need funds, it may be the only source of funds which is accessible to them. And as of today, it really is by a long shot the most competitively priced way to access money. That's a very, very low interest rate, about half of what it is for commercial reverse mortgages, and in fact much lower indeed than most banks' conventional mortgage rates. So, and we'll talk about the circumstances when the HEAS might be tapped into for people who really are in a bind and need those funds. But for anyone else who doesn't need the funds, you know, a 50% increase in your pension payment effectively is going to have a material difference on your quality of life. One way to look at it. And look, as you say, if you can withdraw $13,000 in a year as a single, $20,000 a couple, that's a good emergency cash buffer in a pinch. You might think it could be more. It's much better than a nils loan, and that will cover the cost of an engine rebuild or some failed white goods or anything like that. So this is the scenarios, I think, why you need to know about this scheme to be able to advise your clients. Thanks, Bridget. How does it work? So upon applying for the Home Equity Access Scheme through MyGov or Centrelink, you will be assigned a maximum loan amount. How do they calculate that maximum loan amount? It's a product of two factors. Number one is prescribed aged base multiplier. And so that figure will increase slowly every year. The other part of the equation is an assessment of what's the equity value you have in your property. That's an assessment which is done by a government valuer. And that person or persons are flat out right now in New South Wales because I think there's about an 8-week waiting list to sign up to the scheme. Remember, this is a national scheme, but it's particularly popular in New South Wales for whatever reason. So as I said, it can be any residential property. It doesn't have to be your main residence, and any existing debts on the property, either a conventional or reverse mortgage, will be taken into account. So I give you an example down there. The maximum loan amount is the product of the age-based multiplier and the assessed equity. And I'll use this identical example through the slides as we go along. So let's say someone owns their home outright worth $750,000 and they are aged 75. The magic number, the maximum loan amount for that individual is $281,250. In other words, they could start drip feeding out fortnightly supplements by the Home Equity Access Scheme until the amount that they have withdrawn hits that maximum loan amount. Now you're looking at that 37.5% figure, saying where did that come from? Up next slide, please, Bridget, and I'll show you. Those age-based multipliers are all prescribed and it's all in the public domain. I've got a link there at the bottom of the slide there, and you can see there how the numbers there start ramping up. So for someone age 67, essentially 27.4% of the equity value of the property is how they'll calculate it, and that multiplier then keeps ramping up and up until it gets peaked for people aged 90 and above at 67.5. These percentages are roughly the same percentages that are used by commercial reverse mortgages as well. Commercial reverse mortgages, the difference, which we'll come to, is that they'll give you the whole amount, the whole maximum loan amount as a lump sum payment up front, not so with the HEAS. I have contacted Centrelink a couple of months ago to ask them how many people on the DSP and the carer payment have ever applied for this. I haven't heard back from Centrelink, and the answer may well be zero. The DSP and the carer payment obviously become the age pension, or the DSP becomes the age pension at age 67. So I think, as far as I'm aware, the vast majority of people who have so far tapped into it are age pensions from the age of 67. But to note that if you want to tap into it earlier than that, you're going to have to be on either disability support pension or a carer payment. Thanks, Bridget. So the big question is, you're given a maximum loan amount, how long can you keep drawing down on this scheme before your cumulative debt will top out at that maximum loan amount? Let's take that example I just gave you before, a borrower or a couple, the younger of whom is 75, that property of 750,000. If it's a single person receiving the full age pension, that will last about 23 years until they are age 98. My figures there, you can just see are a little bit out of date because the pension payments have been indexed since I did these slides. A little bit higher, but essentially the same story. For a single person, it'll probably last through for the remainder of their age 75. It will see them through for the remainder of their life. And for a couple, it's likely the case too that it'll last about 18 years. Remember, the couple are withdrawing 50% of the couple pension, which is more than 50% of a singles pension. So they'll hit their limit faster, in this case, about 5 years before the single person would. Next slide, please, Bridget. And the next slide I've got is a table which shows you in concrete
Peter,
terms.
sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
We've just had a question. What about if one member of a couple hasn't reached the age of 67?
Oh, no, I think that's absolutely, well, they won't be receiving a pension at that point. And so the other couple would be eligible and would be receiving as a single age pensioner.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on this next slide, thanks for the question. As I say to people, if you want to interrupt at any stage, I would be surprised if we go through this without people having questions. You can see here, there's a table here. It looks a bit busy, but essentially what this shows is the maximum, or is it how many years people could go for drawing down the maximum 50% payment per fortnight. Each part of that grid shows the single, the left of the slash, and the couple. So let's just take a concrete example. You can see the slide's just a little bit out of whack. But what I was looking at there was a couple who are, say, the youngest of whom is age 69 with $500,000 in equity. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, 14 and 9. So 9 is the couple. So that couple would be able to draw down the maximum home equity access payments for 9 years before the couple hit their limit. Now you can see here the top left of this grid. This involves people who are the youngest, starting at age 67, 69, and the smallest amounts of equity. And they might live in regional areas where homes are cheap, or but you can see here there's all of those are basically single digit numbers of years here. In fact, if you take the uppermost top left figure with a 67-year-old with just $150,000 of equity, if they're a single person, they've got about 3 years of drawing down payments. If it's a couple, just 2 years. And for people in this part of the grid, as it were, they probably need to be really careful about drawing down the maximum entitlement under the home equity access scheme, because they're going to hit their limit reasonably quickly. But they might not need to. That's one of the things about the home equity access schemes. You can choose how much you withdraw down. The limit is set, and that's 50% of the age pension for a full age pensioner. But you can just choose, for a single person on 1,064, they can get up to 532 a fortnight, but they just might want an extra $100 a fortnight or $200 a fortnight or whatever. For people who are living in metropolitan areas, and certainly on the eastern seaboard there, who might have a significant amount of equity in their home, you can see realistically the home equity access scheme is going to see out the duration of most people's lives. Next slide, please, Bridget.
Peter, just a couple of questions. Someone clarified, even if both people are on the title, as long as one member of the couple is 67, they can access the scheme. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And when you sign up for the scheme, what you can do is you can nominate how much of the equity in the property you want to commit to. So if it's a $1 million property, just to keep the math simple, but you want to make sure you've got $400,000 left over to leave to your kids, and you and your partner might be separated but living apart. So you might say of the remainder, you might commit to only $300,000 of the equity in your $1 million property that you want to allocate for the scheme, and your maximum loan amount will be calculated based on that. So it's a little bit complex, but there's lots of flexibility in slicing and dicing and coming up with that equity figure.
Okay, just a couple more questions. Would the equity or the house be revalued every so often?
Got it. Yeah. No, look, like any lender, the government, any lender has the right to value the collateral against a secured loan whenever they want. And look, right now, so in principle, it could be valued every year or so, I guess. I don't know. Right now, as I say, there's an 8-week waiting list while the government valuers just sign up new applicants. So I'd imagine they wouldn't be doing much in the way of valuations going forward regularly, other than by perhaps computer searches. And
thank you. Someone else has asked about the interest rate for the HEAS loan.
3.95%. It's a simple one. That is set by the government. It hasn't been changed since the beginning of January 1st, 2022, despite 10 rises in the cash rate from the RBA. But it's been, and it was deliberately lowered in January of last year from 4.5%, just to encourage more people into it.
And we've had one more question. Can one person only access what share they own in the home if tenants in common or joint tenants?
Yeah, no, look, in the situation where it's tenants in common, I would imagine that they would probably be only committing their share of the equity in the property to the scheme. Yeah, so.
Okay. And look, I've just had somebody say they can't see the grid, but just to let everybody know, I've uploaded the handout into the chat for everybody so they can download it, and I'll also send the handout by email following the webinar. Thanks, Peter. I'll move the slide on now.
And it's just worth pointing that the home value is actually that left column where it's just written unhelpfully as equity amount. So if you think of that as, you can think of that as a home value if it's owned outright. That's the same thing as what we're talking here. We've got age going across the top of that grid, and then the home value or equity amount as a vertical column there on the left. Thanks for the questions, though. All good. So in lots of ways, the home equity access scheme is superior to a reverse mortgage. And if you ever have a client who raises the question of a reverse mortgage, it's absolutely worth bringing this up as an alternative. First and foremost, I just mentioned that interest rate, 3.95%. That is half of what commercial reverse mortgage providers. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention who they are on this forum, but it doesn't matter. You can Google them; they're easy enough to find. And the cheapest of those that I've been able to find is currently about 7.7%. And so very competitive. But even normal commercial conventional mortgages, the variable rates now at most of the lenders are at least 5% if you're getting the really competitive ones in the market. And if you're with a big four, you might be paying something mid-6s, even, God forbid, 7%. So very competitive interest rate. The sole advantage of reverse mortgage obviously is that you get prescribed a maximum loan amount, and you can take that whole sum up front as a lump sum. And that's, there will be some instances where people just want a chunk of money to redo the bathrooms or the kitchen and future-proof their home, and they might need $30,000 or $40,000, say. They're probably in the territory where they need a reverse mortgage to be able to access that sort of a lump sum. As I say, the HEAS is really, by most people, is used as a drip feed loan just to supplement their pension. You can get a lump sum, but you can't get really more than 1 year's worth of entitlements every 12 months. So for that reason, it has a much less aggressive compounding effect. And taking it as a drip feed loan also plays into the behavioural traits of people. Most people are not particularly good at managing large lump sums of money. And so a regular supplement or trickle down payment coming in by the HEAS promotes much better financial discipline in general. Thanks, Bridget. So this is a rather busy slide. I've given this there just so you can see pictorially the difference between the home equity access scheme and a reverse mortgage. And again, we're just dealing with the same scenario here, our 75-year-old with a $750,000 home. And those orange bars down the bottom show how that debt increases and all the way up to just before they turn 98 or whatever, they will hit their maximum loan amount there. So you can see the maximum loan amount, black dots, and it ramps up and up and up and up till they hit 90, and then it flattens off, and they can keep drawing down the home equity access payments until their total debt hits that maximum loan amount. If it's a reverse mortgage, on the other hand, they can get that full amount, that maximum loan amount up front. And they're the grey blue lines there. And once you do that, if you couple that with a much higher interest rate associated with commercial reverse mortgage, you can see how that debt starts ramping up significantly, much quicker. Commercial reverse mortgage providers have all got to provide the same no negative equity guarantee. But you can see here in the scenario, they'd probably be sweating a little bit. Although it is a bit, I've got a red dashed line going right across the middle of the graph, which suggests, which indicates that what would happen if the property price stays constant, which is probably it's totally unrealistic over a 23-year time frame. Centrelink for their maths generally take 3% as a property price indexation. So that $750,000 property would go to about 1.4 over this same time frame. But you can see the commercial reverse mortgage provider in this instance would still be out of pocket in that scenario. Thanks, Bridget. So this is part of the stock advice you'd give to anyone who's considering either a reverse mortgage or the home equity access scheme. And the challenge you have with any debt which you don't pay back along the way is that the debt will start capitalizing and will increase. And if the interest rate is really high, you can see in that little table on the right what happens to the future value of $1 as time passes by, and the difference. And although there's only a factor of 2 difference between the home equity access scheme rate of 3.95 and the 8.15% figure I've shown there, you can see that over a 30-year horizon, the future value of that dollar is almost a factor of 3.5, 4 times as much. And that's what people forget when they take out reverse mortgages or take out these sort of products. If you're doing something that will increase the value of your home, maybe the increase in the home value will keep up with that increased interest payments. But if you're getting a lump sum out to go and buy a depreciating asset like a car or spending on a cruise, it's absolutely fine and that's your choice. But when it comes to eventually repay that debt when the property is sold, you may be paying down many multiples more than the initial borrowed amount. These are riskier products. Obviously, the lenders, because of this so-called crossover risk, or the risk that the debt exceeds the value of the collateral, which is why the interest rates are higher. But yeah, any client you've got who's considering either a home equity access scheme, but especially if they're talking about a reverse mortgage, tell them to be very, very careful about what their funds are spent on. Thanks, Bridget. So let's work with some concrete numbers here, and concrete slightly out of date numbers. But the single age pension at the start of the year was $1,026 a fortnight. That meant half of that amount is $513 per fortnight. So that's the maximum amount that someone can elect to get drip fed in. It would be paid. These schemes are all administered by Centrelink, so they'll make the Centrelink payment and all the HEAS payment together. And that figure, the takeaway figure there, they rather than get the fortnightly payment, they could choose alternatively to get a lump sum. They're about 13,000. It's probably about closer to 14,000 today, since that figure, the pension's gone up to 1,064. Same deal with a couple. Obviously, they're getting about they can get up to $774 as a couple per fortnight, or $20,000 as a lump sum in a year, or mix and match. So there's some good figures to keep in mind. Come back to those in a second. But 13,000 for a single, 20,000 for a couple. Keep that in mind. Thanks, Bridget. So what do you use the HEAS for? And the first thing, obvious thing, I guess, for someone who's not in debt trouble or anything like that, which we'll come to, is how this will improve the quality of your life. I've looked at the total, I've shown there on those two slides what a single person and a couple can actually obtain here and still receive the full age pension. And at point of fact, it's never been a better time to be a working age pensioner, because the government's got introduced all these work bonuses in addition to the earned income. So you can see there that for both a single and for a couple, they can earn a fairly solid amount of money and still receive the full age pension. But let's look at the numbers here, just looking at the settling age pension and just looking at the HEAS payment. And let's assume the person or the couple don't want to be doing any work extra. So for the single person, we've got 26 plus 13 is about 40,000, and for the couple, it's about 40 plus 20 is about 60,000. That's not a bad sum of money. If you look over there on the right in the bubble, I've got listed there AFSA or ASFA's retirement standards, the Australian Superannuation Funds Association. Those are the amounts there that they list for so-called modest retirement or a comfortable retirement. You can look on their website as to how they define modest and comfortable. But you can see here that for a couple or a person on a single age pension, if they tap into the HEAS, they have an amount of money coming in which is getting up towards the comfortable end of the finances. And certainly if they're doing any extra part-time work on the side, they can easily exceed those comfortable thresholds. So there's no question that 50% increase in the pension would make a material difference to the quality of life for many recipients.
We've just had a question, Peter. Yeah. Can you be eligible for an aged pension at 67, still be working, not actually receiving the age pension, and still access HEAS?
Yes. Like it's like Twiggy Forrest is, once he hits 67, he'll be eligible for the age pension. He won't be entitled to receive anything because his income and assets will both, all the Centrelink payments are means tested, but he will be eligible. So essentially any Australian who is age 67 or above and is resident in Australia with an entitlement to some property share can tap into the Home Equity Access Scheme. Now, having said that, if someone's ineligible to actually, is not entitled to receive any payment because of their assets or their income, they're unlikely to have to tap into this source of income to meet expenses. But nevertheless, it's an option that's available to essentially every Australian at that age who has property ownership of some sort. Good question.
Thanks, Peter.
So what else? Next slide, Bridget. What else might we use the Home Equity Access Scheme for besides just increasing our cost of living a bit? Well, the most common one, I think, a good one for many people is to look at it as a line of credit. You don't have to borrow. You can set up the Home Equity Access, go through the process of setting it up. As I say, in New South Wales, there's an 8-week waiting list at present, but you don't have to tap into it. And when you it's one of those schemes you can turn it on and turn it off. So you might want to say, I want to get a supplement for each fortnight to get through the Christmas months, December, January, February, and then turn it off. A lot of flexibility there. If you absolutely have to borrow, and obviously we advise people to avoid borrowing if they can help it, really, to meet sort of blowout expenses. 3.95% is pretty hard to beat. Certainly much better than a credit card. And when we know that people, once they get to a certain age, they stop working, they all like to hang on to their credit card because it provides a security blanket and it's money they can tap into if they really need to. Many of you will probably have experience with people you know who are like that. But look, the Home Equity Access Scheme is much better if you're going to use it as a line of credit and then pay it back. Remember, the HEAS can be repaid partially or fully at any time, so you don't have to let it run and just repay it when the property is sold. You can repay it at any time. You can even scrimp and save and pay it out of your pension payments, I guess, if that was your choice. But you know, windfall sums, part-time income, anything like that, you can repay it at any time. It's more than a nils loan, so it's more flexible in that sense. And really, yes, there's a natural question here. I think that for any clients you've got who are getting up to this chapter in their life, mid-60s onwards, what are they doing with unsecured credit at all at that point in time? If you're working with a client who does have unsecured credit, but they are a homeowner, I'll cover this in a little bit more detail in a second, but it's really important to try and resolve those unsecured debts before you get the client to tap into the HEAS. But this sort of advice is coming up in the subsequent slides. Thanks, Bridget. Right, so this brings us to an increasingly common occurrence that we see nowadays, and that is people who are ending their working life, approaching retirement age, and then they still have, for whatever reason, a bit of residual mortgage debt. It's quite increasingly common today, and I suspect it might be increasingly common in future, even more so. And the conversation you'll generally want to have with these people is that it might be economically more rational for them to downsize. There's obviously incentives to put any proceeds from a downsized move into superannuation. And one thing I will say is that if you get any people, elderly people, say pension age people who've got residual mortgage debt or any debt, in fact, worth looking really, really closely at the suitability assessment that was taken out when that mortgage was taken out, or it's usually the case that the mortgage was taken out a long time ago, but there might have been refinances along the way. My experience is the banks have an absolute blind spot when it comes to these two sections of RG 209, the regulatory guidelines, 62 and 64, which I'm going to call the exit strategy sections. Section 62 basically says it's not enough to look backwards. You've got to look at a person's paychecks. You've got to look forwards in time as well to see if their income is likely to continue throughout the life of the loan. And Section 64 says that if there is some foreseeable event that will happen during the term of a loan, like retirement, then the lender is obliged to make reasonable inquiries as to how that debt will be serviced in the event that foreseeable circumstance happens. So this is all about exit strategy planning, and the banks, all four of them, even the big fours, are weak, really weak in this zone. So any clients you're dealing with who have residual debt, worth looking at the suitability assessments that were made there. Look, there's lots of people at this stage of life who are not necessarily having the most economically rational conversations. I get it that people want to stay in the home that they might have lived in for a long period of time. I fully get that people in regional Australia don't necessarily have downsizing options out there, and they don't have a rental market out there to move into. So it can be a pinch. And look, quite often you just want people who want time just to negotiate the long and protracted and arduous process of sorting out aged care accommodation. So here's the question. What do you do then if someone does have ongoing mortgage payments to a commercial lender? And the question is, as long as that debt is suitably modest, then they might be able to tap into the home equity access scheme in order to pay that debt. I'll show on the next slide exactly what I mean by modest with some concrete numbers, but it's a holding pattern. If they can tap into the HEAS to make the mortgage payments and leave themselves the age pension just to live on, that's doable. That's a holding pattern. And, modest in terms of a principal interest payment might be different from modest on an interest-only payment. Obviously, if they're just paying interest-only, and if you can negotiate a few years with a lender for them to make interest-only payments out of the HEAS, then that might provide options as well. The name of the game here is quite often you're just trying to buy time to allow people to make an unpressured decision where they're not living on the poverty line, having to make mortgage payments out of their pension, just so they can weigh up what their next steps might be. Thanks, Bridget. And I'll talk about now, this is the slide that says, well, when I talk about modest mortgage debt, what does it really look like? And in this table here, you can see down the vertical on the left, we've got the interest rate that's applicable and the remaining term going across the top. And as I say, someone who's retirement age at age 67, if they had a 20-year or even a 15-year loan term remaining on a mortgage, I'd be looking very, very closely at the circumstances when the loan was written and what was the exit strategy planning that went on when the loan was taken out. But you can see here what these figures are all examples in thousands of dollars. Again, a single on the left, couple on the right. So let's just say a couple at both age 67, just to keep the math simple. They've got 10 years remaining at age 67. So this is maybe a 30-year mortgage they took out at the age of 47. 10 years left at age 67. Let's just say they're on 6% as an interest rate in 10 years. Then as long as that debt for the couple is less than $151,000, then they can service that debt with the HEAS payment without having to tap into their pension at all. The debt's more than $151,000. They could choose to use their pension payments as well. If it's significantly more than $150,000, if it's I'd say $250,000, $300,000 more, you're probably having a different conversation with them about the need to just sell and clear that debt. But you can see there across all parts of that table, we're talking just double-digit, low triple-digit thousands for what's a suitably modest mortgage debt that can be serviced with the HEAS. And look, people at that age, you'd expect them, if they've got a mortgage debt, in the ideal world, any debt they would have left should be fairly modest if it hasn't been paid down by then anyway. So that table, I appreciate it looks quite busy, but that gives you an idea of the sort of debts or sort of outstanding mortgage debts that you can possibly entertain a conversation with using the HEAS with a client. Rightmost column there shows the interest-only payments that can be serviced using the HEAS. Now, obviously, those figures are a little bit higher, but obviously also with interest-only schemes, most banks will give you a defined horizon, typically not more than 5 years, after which you've got to come to a different arrangement. So if you look at the main body of the table, if your client has debts which are a little bit more than those principal and interest amounts, then have a look with a lender, see if it's possible to put them on interest only for a little while. Okay, next slide, please, Bridget. So how does this distill down into providing concrete advice for any client you might get? And the first thing to say is anyone who's thinking about a reverse mortgage, even thinking about it, just make sure they know about the HEAS scheme. It is better in almost every way. And the only exception there is if the client needs a lump sum, which is more than the HEAS can provide. The interest rate is compelling at 3.95%. The flexibility of making payments if and when you want, but not at all, if you so choose, is compelling. And it's all absolutely, it should be a default stance for anyone who comes in talking about a reverse mortgage. And remember, they can, if they already have a reverse mortgage, and there are plenty of people who are out there with reverse mortgages from lenders, I mean, all the big banks provided these many years ago. Even if they've got a mortgage in place on their property, the government value will sit down and work out how much equity might be left with that mortgage in place. But rather than draw down any more on another reverse mortgage or maxing out a reverse mortgage, look at tapping into the HEAS. And as I say, this is something that once people have become eligible, they can go through the process of setting up and just leave it sitting dormant in the background. They don't have to draw down on day one. It's much better to set it up and leave it there so it's available to tap into when you need it, than to have to go through the process of 2 or 3 months. We're currently having conversations with the banks and about their approach to hardship. So, because this is a situation of hardship and it's temporary in nature, that so that when people are in a situation where they might need to tap into the HEAS to meet some sort of ongoing mortgage payments, the bank will grant a period of say 3 months to allow that that process to take its course in setting it up. But it doesn't hurt anyone there just to leave this sitting in the background unused as an emergency line of credit. Yeah. Next one, please, Bridget. So what do we do then with people with debts? And here's the scenario I'm going to put to you. These are all Plan Zs, really. The HEAS is probably a last resort idea in general, with the possible exception of some mortgages. There's definitely benefits to keeping people in their homes. I get that. But really, unsecured debts, let's start with those. We don't want to see people at pension age or DSP age, to be honest, with unsecured debts. So it's always really important, I think, to try and work with the lenders to get those debts either waived. If they've been a long-standing customer of the bank, they've probably paid enough interest on the credit card over the lifetime for it to be waived. You know, and the banks, to their credit, seem remarkably flexible, at least the prime lenders do. At the very least, you want those unsecured debts charged off, and charged off just means the interest and fees get frozen thereafter, so the debt just doesn't keep getting any bigger at 20% per annum. But do what you can to get rid of any unsecured debts before you get a client to tap in to the HEAS. We just covered the scenario in the last slide with mortgage repayments, and again, that'll depend on the interest rate and the remaining term, and it might even require you to request a period of interest only on behalf of a client. And the other important thing is here, what about other debts? And look, this is an area which is really unresolved, but I think this is the fertile ground for lawyers and financial counsellors to really explore. New South Wales, as you probably know, has got the most aggressive strata management in terms of pursuing people in the bankruptcy court. As soon as strata debt is above 10 grand, bang, they're off and racing like that. And it's frankly, I work in the bankruptcy courts in New South Wales 1 day a week, and it is shameful the number of people being bankrupted for strata levy debts, which are, you know, $12,000, $13,000, $15,000. Really, it's disappointing. Council rates too, council arrears, the amount of money that's available. Remember, 13,000 for a single, 20 for a couple. That amount will generally cover outstanding strata levies for a year, generally cover council rates. With strata levies and anything like that, really important to try and get onto this as soon as possible before legal proceedings and legal costs start, getting that debt really blowing it out of the water. Well-publicised case you might have read in the news last year, a Greek couple. They had a strata debt, had an old set of apartments and the windows all had to be replaced, so there was a special strata levy, and the original strata debt was just $18,000. So had they tapped into something like the HEAS and withdrawn $20,000 to pay it, they could have settled it there and then. They didn't know about the HEAS. Their financial counsellor didn't know about the HEAS at that point in time. They were taken to court. There was a creditor's petition, and eventually, I think one of the nephews got a GoFundMe page, and they crowdfunded a settlement for $60,000 after a year of adjournments and back and forth. So really important if there's a statement of claim in play or legal proceedings, really just try and tap into this idea of the HEAS really early on before legal costs make the amount unmanageable. It's relatively unheard of, I think, in settling creditors' petitions, but certainly for statements of claim, I think it's a really good avenue to explore with clients who have some sort of equitable interest, just to tap into it and then settle the matter before it goes further. Thank you again for the next one, Bridget. So what will the future hold? So my figures here are a little bit out of date, and I'll talk to the changes. As I say, this was introduced, or a scheme to release the equity from one's home was introduced, I think, in 1985 originally, and it's been changed, and successive governments of both persuasions have done what they can to encourage more and more people to take up the scheme as of today, and the changes introduced by Turnbull's government, which became effective on 1st of July 29, really opened the gates tremendously here. And as of today, I think there's about 6,800 of these loans out there, just under $100 million in total, which is out there, which is still small fry. 100 million is just a rounding error, really, in terms of the amount of money that gets spent on pensions and the like, and it's just a minuscule fraction of the amount of equity that is out there, and which the government is definitely trying to encourage people to tap into, just to improve the quality of their lives if nothing else. I think the changes that were made at the start of January 22, I think were conceived in 2021 in the height of COVID, and they were thinking like government was planning a stall in consumer spending. They thought, how do we just open the floodgates a little bit and get some more money flowing around the economy? So I think a lot of the changes that were introduced from 1st of January 2022 had that as a motivation. But if you read the Australian the Retirement Income Review, which was released a couple of years ago now, it makes it clear that home ownership is an important pillar of Australia's retirement system. And I'm just expressing a personal view here, but since the rate was decreased from 4.5% down to 3.95%, there have been 10 cash rates. In fact, I'm out of date already, 11, because there was one on Tuesday, wasn't there? So 11 cash rate hikes by the RBA, and that figure is still resolutely where it remains. And I think that's just because the government wants to encourage more people to tap in to this. I can see a few questions there.
Yeah. Can you see those, Peter, or would you like me to read them out?
I can see Kylie. What happens on death for beneficiaries of the house? Look, the HEAS has to be repaid upon the sale of the property, and that might be on the winding up of an estate subsequent to the death of the borrower, but the house might be sold and they might downshift earlier, but the HEAS debt will get settled first and cleared before any remaining equity gets distributed to beneficiaries. Same question, I think, from Jenny. If nothing's paid back under the HEAS, the amount owed is reclaimed once both in-couplers died and the property sold. Correct. Yeah. And remember, there's no negative equity guarantee, although the lending limits are very conservative, but there's the maximum that will ever be required to be repaid back is the loan amount. Is there any protection against large or unexpected interest rate increases? Well, I mean, this is a question from Paul. This is an interest rate that's set by the government. It's not set by Philip Lowe. There've been about half a dozen changes in that HEAS rate over the last decade or so, and they don't happen very, very often. And all the changes so far have really been decreases. So, the government wants to encourage people to do this, Paul. So don't want to crystal ball too much into the future, but I don't see that they will necessarily be looking to increase this anytime soon. And the other thing I'd point out is that really the take-up of this scheme before 1st of July 2019 was pretty minimal, and I think it might have been less than 1,000 people nationally. And so most of the people who have taken these loans out won't be anywhere near probably what their maximum loan amount is. Remember, this is a drip-feed loan generally for most people, and you keep drawing down on the HEAS and within the prescribed annual limits until your cumulative debt hits your maximum loan amount. So, look, I don't think there'll be many or any possibly people in the country who are anywhere near their, the maximum loan amount at this point in time. Unless they had a really small amount of equity and they were drawing down really aggressively. So, Jeanette, is the payment from HEAS treated as income for taxation purposes? Look, good question, Jeanette. It's not treated as income, but if you get a lump sum out, then you have 90 days to spend it before it would then be treated and rolled in as part of the asset test. So, by amazing coincidence, I was on the phone earlier this week to a gentleman, 88-year-old gentleman who's looking to tap into the Home Equity Access Scheme. He has $36,000 that he keeps in a bank account as cash, and he doesn't sleep comfortably at night unless that amount is $50,000. These are some of the conversations you have on the National Debt Helpline. And he wanted to tap into the HEAS in order to draw a lump sum out, $13,000, and to get that amount sitting in a bank account outside, up towards 50,000, and he'd been referred by Centrelink to phone the National Debt Helpline. I kind of feel lucky that he got to speak to me. And essentially, what the government doesn't want people just pulling money out of the equity or drawing down against the equity in their house and then just parking it outside. It's there to be spent, and it makes no logical sense to draw down and then start accruing interest on that money if it's just there for a sleep at night factor. The HEAS can be used perfectly as a line of credit, drawing down only if and when you need to and buy as much as you need to. So the notion of, so the government will discourage this. You've got 90 days to withdraw a lump sum to spend it before it then gets rolled in as part of the asset test. And I think it must be an administrative nightmare if you've got 36,000 sitting there legitimately, which would be counted by Centrelink for the asset test. Working out what parts to the 13,000 adds on to it must be an administrative nightmare to break up the various amounts sitting out around in bank accounts like that. So, good question. I don't know if I'm keeping up with this. Can this loan be used to replace cars, renovations, and look, it's your money. You can spend it on what you want. No, that's absolutely fine. I think, for anyone who's using a mortgage, a product like this where there's no obligation to repay, it doesn't make a lot of sense, I think, to spend it on depreciating assets. But I appreciate that white goods fail and cars break down and you need a set of wheels. And, if push comes to shove, this is, it's the cheapest way to borrow money for that. Can be used for travel and for holidays, I say, and it's your money. It's a person's money. They can spend it on what they want. But like all of these products where there's no repayment obligation, the compounding effect is something to watch out for. Yes, the compounding effect under the HEAS is less because it's a low interest rate, 3.95%. But I think the idea is really if it helps people to stay in their home a little bit longer as long as they're willing and able. It's a brilliant product, and people should do that.
I'll just answer the next couple of questions. It's about recording. The person may not have heard me at the beginning. Our webinars are recorded and uploaded onto the Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel, so you can certainly access it and listen to it later.
Yeah, and quickly, Donna, the DSP and the carers pension, look, the Centrelink lookup tables go down to the age of 50. So in principle, I think if you're on the DSP and a homeowner, or on the carers payment and a homeowner, you can access that down to the age of 50. Very low multiplier down there. I think it was about 17%. It was on that earlier slide where we showed a graph. So it'll be, if you're age 50, I think it'll be 17.5%, I think it was. Don't have the slides in front of me, times the equity value. So very, very conservative way they set the maximum loan amount. One last slide, I think, Bridget. That's the last one. Look, number one, this used to be called the pension loan scheme, and all was well in the world when you looked up pension loan scheme because it was unique. There was no one else providing anything like this, and you got all the information you needed. So be careful nowadays Googling home equity access scheme, because all the hits you're going to get, the first ones, will be commercial reverse mortgages. Just stick to the government website, some of which you can see there I've shown are still labelled with the pension loan scheme, which is the old name. Good sources of information there, all of them. There's a ripper online calculator from Centrelink there, which I encourage you to just play with at any time. It allows you to just put in all your details, and then it'll come back with, how long would you expect this to last, and et cetera. Really good scheme. And the numbers I've used in this talk, I remember my example of a 75-year-old with a $750,000 house, I've taken basically from that Centrelink online estimator. You can apply online. I think I gave a link earlier. It's all done through MyGov, although you can do it. A lot of people who aren't technically literate just will go into their local Centrelink office to set it up, but it can all be done online. And that is all. So I'm happy to take any other questions people have got.
Thank you, Peter. You may have spoken about Financial Rights Legal Service or Legal Centre, excuse me, but because there was that issue with your microphone at the beginning, I wonder if you might just want to speak briefly about the other services that Financial Rights offer.
No, sure, Bridget. Look, Financial Rights, I think we've got 11 financial counsellors, maybe 15 solicitors, 40 staff in total, some of them working on policy and the like. Financial Rights Legal Centre is one of the 2 centres in New South Wales that takes phone calls on the NDH, the National Debt Helpline. They take calls nationally on the Mob Strong Debt Helpline. And we've also got a caseworker line as well. So probably find that number for people and send that out. But if you've got any questions that you want to speak, ask questions on that, the caseworker line is a great resource. The solicitors work on the insurance law service. They work on a separate legal advice line for credit and debt issues. And they also have a line called the disaster recovery line or whatever. And so about 6 different phone lines in total. We also do sort of advocacy work for clients. But yeah, so about 40 people in total at Financial Rights, and that's what we do.
Yeah, it's a fabulous service. And Peter, you may have said this and I missed it because I was worrying about technical matters. Do Centrelink take a charge over the person's property to ensure the repayment of the debt?
Yeah, it's just like just like a normal mortgage in that sense. There'll be a caveat put on the property, and you know, I haven't seen any instances of what happens here when people die, but the same way most commercial lenders will allow a grace period of sort of 6 months or more for probate to run its course and for alternative arrangements to be put in place to either pay out the loan or put the property on the market. As I say, the government wants to encourage people into this product. So, you know, I'd be very surprised if there was unusually aggressive collection processes subsequent to someone's death.
Fantastic. Thank you. And it looks like you've answered everybody's questions throughout the webinar. So I'd like to say a huge thank you, Peter, for sharing this invaluable information with all of us. And just let people know that I'll share the links that Peter's provided on the presentation in the email that you'll receive following the webinar, and also send a copy of the handout. And there's been a lot of thank yous coming through, Peter. So I think everyone else has really appreciated the information. And we'll finish, sorry.
No, terrific. It's a complex area, so there's not enough people know about it. And I hope today you'll be in the top few % of people who know the ins and outs of how this scheme really works. Great questions, people.
Thanks very much. And thank you everyone for attending. And yes, the recording will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel in the next few days. Thanks, Peter, and thank you all. We'll finish the webinar now.